Hi YouTube, my name is Samantha Marandola. I'm an English and theater major at the University of Waterloo. I'm currently in my third year. So for today I'm going to be doing a dramatic reading of Porphyria's Lover by Robert Browning, and then afterwards I will be doing an analysis so that you can prepare for class. Okay. Porphyria's Lover, Robert Browning. The rain set early in tonight. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break. When glided in Porphyria, straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat and let her damp hair fall. And, last, she sat down by my side and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and, stooping, made my cheek lie there, and spread o'er all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me, she too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free, from pride and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So, she was come through wind and rain, but sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud, and last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do. And all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain she felt. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I wearily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain, and I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still, the smiling rosy little head, so glad it had its utmost will, and all its scorn at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. Porphyria's love. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard, and thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. So basically, now we'll be doing the analysis. So Porphyria's Lover was written in the Victorian era, named after, and obviously named after Queen Victoria, who was the head of the monarchy, and basically some works that were like swirling around within this time period were In Memoriam. That was a very big popular one, which was basically what the Queen Victoria actually came out with a statement that's saying next to the Bible is, I'm going to paraphrase, but it was next to the Bible, In Memoriam is her comfort. So essentially, In Memoriam, to give a bit of context, was a very dark poem, contrary to what a lot of people believe the Romantics kind of came out with, in the sense that it was questioning death and religion, questioning an afterlife, which was something that was relatively new and not very thoroughly discussed up until that point. So that was a very popular ideology that was spreading around, the concept of death, what happens after death. think of Hamlet. This isn't the right time period, but think of Hamlet's final "To Be or Not to Be," where that famous soliloquy that contemplates suicide, but also kind of poses the question as to what occurs after death. So the reason that it's important to give this context was because that was the ideology that was spread throughout the time. So Robert Browning, as well as many other poets, were playing off that. They were coming out with like edgier works, rather than in the Romantic period, which focused on the viewer's outlook. So think of that picture of the man looking up down over a mountain, but you only see him in the picture, despite the fact that he's looking at the mountain. So the Romantic period was very much his perspective. I guess the Victorian period was still kind of like that too, because within this, it's talking about, it's from his perspective, but it's less so about his emotions and what he was feeling, and more so that the speaker or the voice within this poem is just telling the story of what happened. So basically within this, the speaker is actually, so to give a summary, the speaker is actually talking about how this woman, a woman with long golden yellow hair, loves him very much. And she comes in and she confesses her love to him, and essentially says that she wishes she could be his. And essentially the speaker comes to realize that Porphyria worships him, that she loves him only, and so the speaker, to grant her wish, to relieve her of the stresses of life, as well as to make sure that she belonged to the speaker forever, he took her by her long golden hair and wrapped it around her neck and strangled her to death. So at the reason that this poem is a little funny is because in the beginning it sounds very much like it's going to be a very romantic poem, because it's talking about, it's giving this beautiful imagery of like the rain setting early in the night, the elm tops. It's talking about one glided in Porphyria, like she just kind of floated in. It's giving like she blazed up in the cottage warm, like it's kind of implying that it's going to be something that's romantic and beautiful, and she comes over to him, and then she makes him rest his head on her shoulder, and like confesses her love to him. So everyone thinks that this is a romantic poem until the shocking line, in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around and strangled her. That kind of just jumps out at you. If this was a sonnet, that would be the Volta. It's like, what? What do you mean? This was supposed to be romantic, but now you're killing her. So the reason that Robert Browning did this was because the poem is often considered something that people use as, he wanted to kind of imply to the reader, hey, so you understand the motive of the murderer. You understand why he did it, because he was trying to relieve the stresses of Porphyria and grant her the wish that she wanted was to be his solely, but yet you're also not sympathetic towards him or empathetic to the fact that he's still a murderer, though you understand his actions. So he was kind of exploring and tampering with that gray area. Like, what does that mean now? What does it mean that you can understand someone or sympathize with them without actually like reasoning or rationalizing that they're innocent? So he also kind of challenges the reader to say, okay, well, what did you do when you heard of the murder? And if the reader answers, well, nothing, it's fictional, the poet suggests, well, does it matter that it's fictional? What did you do? How did you react? Did you try to stop it? And I personally think, if I were to take my own criticism, it sounds a lot to me like what we do on the news when we read something in a news article and we don't react to it because it's on paper, it's out of our control, we can't do anything about it. Similarly to this poem, it's been pre-written, we can't do anything to stop the murder, and yet we still keep reading. And we still feel bad, but we still understand the murderer, but we didn't do anything to stop it, but while we don't agree with it. So it's kind of if I were to take a guess, it seems like a social criticism to me. Within an English class that I took that analyzed this poem, we focused a lot on, and yet God has not said a word, because assuming that, okay, so this is British works, so they're still, even though they're questioning God, religion is still a big factor and is still a big part of their culture, even if they aren't necessarily agreeing with it. For example, English classes were being instilled within this time, or I don't know when, but the reason that English classes were instilled in the first place, the reason that they're part of the school board, was because people were actually starting to stray away from religion, but there still needed to be some sort of moral capacity, some sort of moral outline that people followed, that they were interested in, and so literature kind of offered them that, if that makes sense. Something that allowed people to think about morality and philosophy without it necessarily being attached to religion, which people were starting to stray away from at this time. So, but this line still sticks out, and yet God has not said a word. So, it not only does the murderer think they were just, but they thought that they were so just that God themselves should have gave them some sort of verbal gratification for the murder that just took place. That's how strongly the speaker feels towards the act that occurred. So that line just sticks out, because at the time, God was considered the almighty figure. Whether or not you're religious, that was kind of considered a well-known ideology at the time. So if God didn't give them gratification for how wonderful the act was, that's how firmly this person believes they were correct. And so what do we do with that? What do we do with someone that thinks that they are so correct in what they're doing? That God themselves, the person that they feel is the one that granted them life, should come down and give them gratification for the murder. What do you do in a situation like that? So that's what this poem's kind of exploring. As a personal criticism or analysis, I'm saying that because I want to separate what was said in class from what I was saying, because I don't want you guys to go to class and then say something that I said and the prof being like, no, that's not commonly acknowledged by people who have studied this for 20 plus years, so I don't know. But I still think it's valid to say things that you think. So, and yet God has not said a word. So I think that's also supposed to be, it's kind of like, I think there's there's a double meaning behind that. Because it's like, and yet God has not said a word, so God hasn't given them the gratification. But it could also be taken as like a bit of a jab, like, and yet God has not said a word, yet God didn't do anything. I killed someone and God didn't criticize me. There was no vengeance, there was no consequence. That's how I take it. I take that, I know in my classes we're taught to think, and God has not said a word, like, wow, God didn't give me gratification for this amazing act that I just committed. But instead, I like to think of it as like, slap in the face, like, I can do whatever I want, because there isn't hell, and if God hasn't said a word about it, there was no consequence for this, so I can make Porphyria mine forever. But I don't think that's necessarily correct, because he was saying that he brought her wish. There's like a line specifically that said her utmost wish. That he granted her utmost wish. So, clearly he thought he was doing well, but I still like to think of it as the other way too. Just a little further information you should know about Robert Browning. So, at the time, it was actually Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which was his wife, who was more successful than him. Actually, she was nominated for Poet Laureate, which was the greatest honor in Britain at the time. So, she was a very successful woman. She came out with a lot of poems, and she came out with a lot of successful works that were arguably more successful than Robert Browning's, especially at the start of his career when they had met. So, at the time, it was almost considered controversial that they were together, because she was a little older, not by much, I don't think, but she was still more mature. She was more successful in her career, and at the time it was considered odd that someone would want to be in a relationship with someone that, that specifically confining to the gender norms at the time, which I hate, but you still need to discuss. It would have been Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It was like kind of controversial that she was with him, even though they were both poets. So I don't know. I would not have given them a hard time, first of all. Second of all, I'm also a feminist, so I would not have given... I actually think it's ridiculous. But that was the norm at the time, unfortunately. So but that's even a more powerful statement to her, because she was like breaking out against gender norms, and a lot of her poems are actually pretty feministic. I don't know if it's feministic. There's a lot of feminist ideologies embedded within them, within the Portuguese poets, which is a sequence of sonnets that she wrote to Robert Browning, and then did under the anonymous name the Sonnets of the Portuguese, but we all knew it was her because when they came out, it was very apparent that that was her style of writing. So, it was basically that it was clear that she came out with them, and then within them, she's talking about, she kind of puts Robert Browning on the pedestal, which was different at the time because women were often the ones that were idealized within those sonnets, and then their features would be so specifically described, and they would be considered like the sun. And if you want an example of that, look at Astrophel and Stella. Basically, that's like him writing like about these poems about this this one woman that he was chasing throughout his entire life, but never got. So he put her on a pedestal. So that was common at the time, but she did that for him. And additionally, she actually, because she was like kind of taking jabs at society too, because she was like, hey, yeah, I can't. She was kind of using it as a backfire. Oh shoot, I should have like pulled up the poem, but she's taking like jabs at society because she's saying that, oh, I would confess my love to you, but I have to be silent because women don't have a voice in this society. So, I don't remember exactly what she did, but if you look up sonnets from the Portuguese and you read through them, there's a part where she talks about being silent. Take that as feminism, like look at that from a feminist perspective, and then you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Also, ask your profs about that to elaborate more, because they'll probably have more information about that. But yeah, that's Porphyria's Lover. I'm trying to think if I should include anything else. It's pretty self-explanatory. He also wrote My Last Duchess, which was also about a death. So we were like in my class, we were kind of wondering what his obsession was with death, but I think it was less so death / murder, more so pieces that made you think. And honestly, every writer kind of knows that you go through a bit of a morbid phase where you write about death and murder as part of, yeah, like, I don't know, I think every writer kind of knows that. Like, if you go into an English class, there's been complaints that all the short stories are about death, and you're like, why? There's other more cheery things we can write about, but people just seem so fascinated about it because, like many other things in life, death is unknowable. So, poetry is often meant to determine or find answers from the unknowable. That's kind of the point. So I think that's why that happens often. I will attach the link to this poem in, I don't know what that thing's called, the bio. And I will also type it out for you because I'm sure it's fine. He is dead, so I don't think I have copyright issues. Okay, yeah, hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe. And, yeah, good luck on your English classes. I'm assuming that's what you're reading for. Maybe you just like poetry. That's cool too. But if you are in English classes, keep watching YouTube videos before the class after you've done your reading, because that's a good idea. Because I literally did that from one of my classes for the Astrophel and Stella series of sonnets. I looked up YouTube videos for it, and then everything that was said on the YouTube videos was addressed in class. So I was like participating a lot because I already knew all this stuff because I did my research the night before. So yeah, keep doing that. Okay, yeah, if you've subscribed to my channel, I'll post more of this stuff. I post monologues too, comedic skits, stuff like that. So enjoy. I don't know how to end this now.